I thought the rooftop dinner was Daniel's way of making up for the fights we'd had lately. The city lights shimmered, the champagne was cold, and my birthday cake read, "Here's to freedom." I didn't understand what it meant until he stood, raised his glass, and said, "Pack your bags. You're leaving tonight." Laughter rippled from his mother's side of the table, sharp as broken glass. My hands didn't shake, not when I smiled, not when I slipped the tiny USB a waitress had just pressed into my palm, whispering, "You'll need this." That was the moment the real game began. The moment the words left his mouth, the room seemed to tilt. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The jazz band kept playing, but the notes felt off-key, each trumpet wail cutting through my skull. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile, though I felt the weight of every pair of eyes pressing down on me. Daniel drained his champagne and set the glass down with deliberate care, like a judge delivering a sentence. "This isn't a joke, Emily," he added, as if the public humiliation needed clarification. "I've arranged for the movers to come tomorrow morning. I'll cover a hotel for a week." His tone was smooth, almost compassionate, as if that made it better. I scanned the table. His mother's eyes sparkled with something far too cruel to be joy. The corners of her mouth tightened, not in sympathy, but in satisfaction, like a chess player watching her opponent's king cornered. The same look I'd seen when she'd accidentally forgotten to invite me to family dinners, or when she'd suggested I sign a routine prenuptial amendment just last month. "Freedom," Daniel's sister muttered under her breath, raising her wine glass to her mother. The word stabbed deeper than Daniel's announcement. The cake sat untouched in the center of the table, its white icing glowing under the warm lights, the looping letters mocking me. I took a slow breath, letting the air cool the heat rising in my chest. No tears. Not here. Not for them. "I see," I said softly, the words tasting like metal. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. That's when I felt it, a brush against my elbow. I turned, and a waitress I didn't recognize leaned down as if to refill my glass. Instead, she slipped something small and hard into my palm. Her lips barely moved. "I worked for your husband. You need this." My hand closed around the object instinctively. It was a black USB drive, no larger than my thumbnail. I glanced up, but she'd already melted back into the shadows near the bar, her face unreadable. I slid the USB into my clutch, my pulse quickening. My gaze swept back to Daniel, who was already fielding questions from a friend about how sudden it all was. He looked relaxed, relieved, as if he'd been carrying this secret for weeks, waiting for the perfect stage to set it free. I didn't touch the cake. I didn't even pretend to eat. I excused myself under the guise of needing fresh air, my heels clicking against the polished wood floor as I moved toward the elevator. In the mirrored wall of the lift, I caught my own reflection, shoulders back, chin high, eyes calm. But underneath, a storm churned. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and pulled out my phone. My fingers hesitated over the USB. There were too many questions. Who was the waitress? Why help me? And what could possibly be on here that she risked slipping it to me in front of everyone? The rooftop Wi-Fi was strong. I plugged the USB into the small adapter I kept for my phone, an old habit from my days as a journalist. The folder inside was labeled simply, "Transfer." My thumb tapped it open. PDF after PDF filled the screen. Legal documents, all stamped and signed. My breath caught when I recognized the letterhead. Daniel's company. The first document was a transfer agreement dated 2 days ago, transferring 100% of his shares to his mother. The next showed the liquidation of multiple joint accounts I hadn't known existed, wired to an offshore trust in her name. 48 hours. That's all it had taken for him to strip away everything we'd built, and he hadn't even told me until now, until my birthday dinner, surrounded by people who would watch me fall apart. I sat there for a long moment, the cold tile pressing into my back, the documents burning into my mind. My heart was steady now, slower, I remembered the look in his mother's eyes, the way she'd seemed to savor my humiliation. This wasn't Daniel's idea alone. This was a family play, planned and rehearsed. I exited the stall, washed my hands slowly, and stared into the mirror. My reflection stared back, but she wasn't the same woman who'd walked into this dinner expecting flowers and a toast. She was quieter, colder. When I returned to the table, Daniel barely looked up. His mother offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I smiled back, a different smile this time, one that told her I'd heard her message, and I was already composing my reply. The USB was still in my clutch, warm from my grip. They thought they'd taken everything from me tonight. They had no idea what I was about to take back. I didn't leave the restaurant in tears. I left with the slow, measured steps of someone already resigned to her fate. That was the image I wanted them to see. Daniel, his mother, everyone at that table. Let them believe they'd broken me. Let them relax. Outside, the night air was sharp, the city skyline shimmering like a million cold eyes. I pulled out my phone, angled the camera toward my face, and hit Go Live. My voice was soft, almost trembling. "Thank you for the birthday wishes," I told the invisible audience. "It means a lot, especially tonight. This will probably be my last post for a while." I let my gaze drift toward the street, let my voice crack on a few words, then ended the stream. To anyone watching, I was just another woman blindsided by heartbreak, retreating into silence. But to me, it was the opening move. 3 months ago, I had started an anonymous TikTok channel, just a whisper in the chaos of social media at first. I'd told the story of a friend whose husband had suddenly asked her to leave, whose in-laws had conspired to erase her from the family's life. I spoke without naming names, without showing my face, but with enough detail to stir something in people. The videos had gone viral. Hundreds of thousands of women shared their own stories in the comments. Some of them offered more than sympathy. They offered information. That channel wasn't just an outlet, it was a net. And now it had caught more than I'd ever expected. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and went straight to the safe behind my closet. Inside, tucked beneath tax records and a stack of passports, was a slim leather folder. I opened it, revealing a banking certificate most people would never see in their lifetime. A numbered account offshore in a jurisdiction Daniel barely knew existed. It had been a payment for an exposé I'd written years ago, the kind of investigation that forces corrupt politicians to retire early. I'd left journalism soon after, but I hadn't forgotten how to hide things. Daniel thought I was an open book. He'd read maybe the first few chapters. The rest of the story, the one with the investigative awards, the death threats, the source in the Cayman Islands, was one he'd never cared to know. I sat at my desk, flipping through old notes, cross-referencing dates and transactions. If Daniel had moved assets offshore for his mother, there would be fingerprints. Transfers leave shadows even in the darkest corners of banking. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the preview line froze me in place. "I'm his first wife. We have unfinished business." I answered. Her voice was low, deliberate. "I've been where you are," she said, "and I know what you're about to go through. Daniel doesn't just leave women, he empties them, drains them until they can't fight back." "How do I know you're not working for him?" I asked. "Because I'm not afraid to tell you the truth," she said. "He married me for a $5 million life insurance policy his father set up. The day it matured, he filed for divorce. I survived because I had my own safety net. Do you?" Her words lodged like splinters. "What do you want from me?" "Not money," she said. "A chance to finally burn him to the ground." I listened as she laid out pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed. Other women, other marriages, each ending the same way. Financial ruin for them, a windfall for Daniel and his family. She had documents, recordings, even a sworn statement from one of Daniel's former business partners. By the time the call ended, my desk was littered with notes. The USB drive still sat where I'd left it, a silent reminder of the dinner that had started this war. But now I had something else, an ally who knew Daniel's playbook. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Vulnerable? That's what they thought, and for now, that's exactly how I'd let them see me. But I had my weapons, and I had just started loading them. The first wife's files arrived in a single encrypted email, password protected, with a phrase only someone who had lived with Daniel would know: the make and model of his first car. Inside was a trail of contracts, bank transfers, and legal settlements spanning over a decade. The pattern was undeniable. Each marriage lasted just long enough for the money to mature, the assets to be shifted, the victim to be left with nothing. It wasn't just Daniel. His mother's name appeared on nearly every document, sometimes as a beneficiary, sometimes as a witness. She had been there at the signing of prenups, at the transfer of deeds, even as a trusted advisor to the other women. They weren't simply a dysfunctional family, they were a business operation. I thought back to the early days of my marriage, Daniel's emergency business trips that always coincided with critical company filings, the sudden life insurance policy his mother urged me to take for our daughter's security, the day he convinced me to sign a financial power of attorney, just in case. I told myself then it was trust. Now I saw it for what it was, staging. I was still mapping the timeline when my lawyer called. His voice was tight. "Emily, I just got word from opposing counsel. Your mother-in-law has filed a lawsuit accusing you of embezzling funds from the Rising Daughters Foundation." I gripped the phone. The foundation was my creation, born from my own savings, meant to give women like me a way out of financial abuse. "That's impossible," I said. "They claim you diverted donations to a personal account." He continued, "There's a paper trail. I haven't seen it yet, but they've filed it with the court. This is serious." By the time I hung up, my pulse was hammering. It was a smart move, dirty, but smart. If they could discredit me publicly, every piece of evidence I had would look like revenge, not truth. I reached out to one of my most trusted contacts, a forensic accountant who had helped me once before. We met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. His expression was grave. "Emily, I have to tell you, someone in your camp is leaking information. The other side knows about your offshore account and the investigation you're running." The words landed like a punch. My circle was small, too small for this to be an accident. That's when I thought of her, the first wife. I called her immediately, but the line went straight to voicemail. Something in my gut twisted. Hours later, Daniel's attorney filed a motion to admit testimony from a prior spouse about my alleged misconduct. The betrayal was almost elegant in its precision. She had approached me as a victim, offered me a trove of evidence, and then, when I let her in, passed my strategy straight to Daniel. The USB, the bank records, my timeline, he had it all now. I barely had time to process before the real blow came. A federal injunction froze my personal accounts, citing concerns about asset concealment. My lawyer explained in clipped sentences that until the case was resolved, I couldn't access my savings, the offshore account, or the trust I'd set up for my daughter. That night, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the darkened city beyond the window. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. My daughter slept in the next room, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath us had just been pulled away. Losing the money was one thing. Losing the ability to fight, that was worse. Without funds, my legal defense would wither. Without a legal defense, I could lose custody. And if I lost her, nothing else would matter. I thought of Daniel, somewhere in a high-rise apartment, maybe sipping his favorite bourbon, confident that he'd checkmated me. He had the resources, the allies, the script he'd perfected over years. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been here before. Different faces, different stakes, but the same darkness. And every time, I'd found a way out. Even at rock bottom, I wasn't done. I was just starting to learn the shape of the battlefield. The night after the injunction froze my accounts, I sat in the dark with my laptop, the USB drive still within reach. Losing quietly had never been in my nature, and if Daniel wanted a public war, I would give him one. I cued the file I had been saving, a shaky, grainy video shot in a dim hotel suite. Daniel sat across from a man in a tailored suit, a briefcase open between them. His voice was low but clear enough for the microphone hidden in the lamp to catch every word. Promises of expedited permits for a high-rise project in exchange for a cash consulting fee slid across the table. At 7:00 a.m., I posted it to my anonymous TikTok account with a caption that simply read, "Happy birthday to me, your birthday betrayal." Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By noon, national news outlets were running with the story. By evening, Daniel's face was plastered on every screen in the city. I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. That's when I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Judge Harris answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. I reminded him of a night 15 years ago when I'd helped track down the man who had abducted his teenage daughter. It hadn't been part of my job then, but it had saved her life. "I need a favor," I said, and told him everything. By the next morning, an emergency motion was filed on my behalf, fast-tracking my own claims against Daniel and his mother. The filing included the USB documents showing asset transfers, combined with the viral bribery video. It was enough to open a full-scale tax investigation. The fallout was immediate. 3 days after the video dropped, shares of Daniel's company had plummeted 60%. Contracts were canceled. His board convened an emergency meeting and stripped him of his authority pending review. The calls started pouring in, first from reporters, then from women, former wives, former fiancés, even a woman who had walked away from Daniel just days before their wedding. Each had a story, each with receipts. I connected them to my attorney and to each other, forming a coalition too loud to ignore. Soon, social media was flooded with their testimonies. Clips from old weddings, bank records, screenshots of text messages where Daniel and his mother discussed exit timelines. The hashtag #birthdaybetrayal became a rallying cry. I decided it was time to step into the light. At a press conference outside the courthouse, I faced the cameras without sunglasses, without notes. "My name is Emily Carter," I began. "I am a former investigative journalist, and I have spent the last 6 months documenting the systematic exploitation of women by Daniel Carter and his family." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, shouts, a storm of camera flashes. For years, I had hidden that part of my life, keeping my past work buried to protect my family. Now, it was the weapon that turned the tide. The lawsuits multiplied. The IRS joined the fray. Daniel's mother's accounts were frozen. Her passport was confiscated. Daniel himself was summoned for a deposition he couldn't avoid. I watched from the gallery as he walked in, head low, jaw tight. I should have felt triumphant, and in some ways, I did. But with every headline, every breaking news segment, my phone filled with messages from strangers, some supportive, others invasive. Reporters camped outside my apartment. Paparazzi followed me to the grocery store. I'd won this battle, but the cost was clear. Privacy was no longer mine. Every part of my life was open for inspection, dissected for clicks and commentary. Standing at my window one night, looking out over the city that had watched me rise and nearly fall, I realized that survival had come at a price I could never truly pay back. I had burned the board, but I wasn't sure what I'd built in its place. The offer came less than a week after Daniel's company collapsed. A major publishing house wanted me to write a memoir, 7 figures up front, full creative control, global release. On paper, it was a dream, but I knew exactly why they wanted it now: timing. My name was everywhere, my story fresh, the public hungry for more. I agreed, reluctantly, hoping to control the narrative before someone else did. The moment the contract was signed, the invitations rolled in. Morning shows, late-night talk programs, podcasts. Producers promised empathy, a chance to tell my truth. But the questions they asked weren't about corruption or justice. They wanted the dirt. What did Daniel say in bed? Did I suspect his affairs? How much money had I really hidden? Then came the video, a 5-minute montage pieced together from my live streams, press conferences, and social media posts. Edited just so, it painted me as a manipulator, a woman who had orchestrated her own public victimhood for fame and fortune. It hit the internet like wildfire, shared by influencers, picked up by gossip sites. Within days, the tone of my inbox shifted. Where there had been messages of solidarity, now there were accusations, threats, demands for refunds from donors to my foundation. Sponsors pulled out of charity events. My own board asked me to consider stepping aside until the noise died down. The blow that landed hardest wasn't aimed at me directly. It hit Rachel, my closest aide at the foundation. A tabloid ran a front-page spread on her past. Photos from her college days, rumors about relationships, even her parents' bankruptcy records. She resigned the next day, her voice shaking when she called to say goodbye. "They'll come for everyone around you," she said. Emily, I can't survive this." I started digging, determined to find who was orchestrating the smear. What I found chilled me. Buried in a leaked email chain from an anonymous source was the name of the media conglomerate funding the campaign against me. Their outlets had run the most damaging stories, hired the photographers staking out my building, and promoted the viral video. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. At the top of the conglomerate's organizational chart was a name I had never expected to see: Charles Whitmore. Publicly, he was a respected philanthropist, an investor in dozens of industries. Privately, he was Daniel's father. The first time I met Daniel, years ago at a charity gala, Charles had been there. I remembered him shaking my hand, smiling warmly, asking about my work. Now I realized it had been more than small talk. He had been assessing me, deciding whether I fit the family's plan. When I finally confronted him, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in the lobby of a hotel, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and cologne. He didn't flinch when I said his name. "You've been busy," I told him. His smile was faint, almost paternal. "I protect my family's interests." "You mean you destroy women for sport?" "Not sport," he corrected. "Strategy. Every marriage was an acquisition. You were no different. You had access to networks, to information Daniel couldn't get on his own, and you gave it willingly." The admission was so casual, so devoid of shame, that for a moment I couldn't speak. He glanced at his watch, as if this conversation was just another meeting on his schedule. "You've played your hand well, Emily," he said, "but you've made yourself the story. That's a dangerous place to be. We'll see how long you can hold it." He walked away before I could answer, leaving me standing in the echo of his footsteps, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had thought Daniel was the architect of my ruin. Now I saw the truth. He had only been the front man. The real power had always been behind the curtain, and it was far more calculating than I'd imagined. And if Charles Whitmore had been watching me from the very beginning, then my war was only halfway over. The morning I decided to release everything, the city was still half asleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee, my laptop open, the folder of documents glowing on the screen. Years of financial records, marriage certificates, court filings, wire transfers, every link in the chain that bound Daniel's family business of deception. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the women before me and the ones who would come after if I stayed silent. I uploaded the files to a public archive, shared the link with every major investigative outlet, and posted it on my own channels with a single line: "Here's the whole story." Within hours, it was everywhere. Front-page headlines, breaking news segments, legal analysts dissecting every detail. The Whitmore name, once untouchable, was dragged into the open. By the second day, the court summoned me for a private meeting. My attorney's voice was measured as we entered the judge's chambers. "They're offering a settlement," he said. full dismissal of their claims, plus a financial payout that will set you and your daughter for life. One condition, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. The figure they slid across the table made my chest tighten. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. But the ink on that contract would bury the truth again, and all the women who had stood beside me would be left in the shadows. I didn't need time to think. "No deal," I said, my voice steady. Walking out of that courthouse felt like stepping off a cliff. I knew exactly what I was giving up, but I also knew what I was keeping: my name, my voice, and the right to use both. 2 weeks later, I sold my apartment, closed every account that still bore my name, and booked one-way tickets to Paris for myself and my daughter. We left on a gray morning, carrying only what fit in 2 suitcases. I didn't tell anyone but my lawyer. The city faded behind us, replaced by the hum of the airplane and the quiet weight of a new beginning. In Paris, anonymity felt like luxury. We rented a small flat on the left bank, walked to the markets, blended into the crowd. For the first time in years, I could stand in a cafe without someone recognizing me. Back in the States, the wave I had started kept rolling. The women I'd connected with formed the Alliance for Marital Justice, pooling resources to sue collectively. They lobbied for new laws to protect spouses from financial entrapment, drawing national attention. And without planning it, they began using my name as shorthand for survival. "Pullin' Emily," they'd say, meaning fight back. I didn't return to journalism, not in the way I once knew it. Instead, I began working quietly with shelters, teaching financial literacy to women leaving abusive marriages. I showed them how to read bank statements, how to find hidden accounts, how to build a safety net even in the middle of chaos. Watching them grow stronger was more rewarding than any headline I'd ever written. One afternoon, a package arrived from New York. Inside was a documentary proposal, "Pack Your Bags," the Emily Carter story. The opening scene was a recreation of my birthday dinner, the moment Daniel told me to leave. The filmmakers wanted to show everything: the betrayal, the fight, the fallout. My first instinct was to decline. I'd fought so hard to disappear. But then I thought of the women still trapped, the ones who needed to see what survival looked like. When the film premiered a year later, I sat in the back row of a small theater in Paris, my daughter's hand in mine. On the screen, a woman who looked like me smiled across a candle-lit table, unaware of the sentence about to be delivered. My daughter leaned in and whispered, "That's you, right?" I nodded. That was me. This, I squeezed her hand, is us now. The credits rolled. Outside, Paris shimmered under the streetlights. I had left the game they tried to force me into, and in its place, I had built my own. The rules were mine now, and I intended to keep them that way.